Sister laughed. "This is what you get for acting like you're better," as she smashed her fist into our three-tiered wedding cake and threw her glass of champagne directly into my bride's face. My mother rushed forward immediately, not to help my crying wife, but to comfort my sister and stroke her hair, so I said absolutely nothing, packed my bags, and systematically dismantled my sister's entire financial life by the time the sun came up. I'm Liam, 33 years old, and I never in a million years imagined that my perfect wedding day would end in an absolute disaster of epic proportions. One moment, I was holding my beautiful bride, Elena, swaying to our first dance under a canopy of string lights. The next, my 25-year-old sister, Chloe, was screaming at the top of her lungs, champagne was flying through the air in a golden arc, and expensive wedding cake was smashed across the polished hardwood floor. Her vicious words still echo in my head every single time I close my eyes. The worst part wasn't even the act itself, it was the fact that my mother instantly rushed to coddle her while Elena stood there trembling in her ruined custom gown. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene that night, but what I did the very next morning changed the trajectory of our family forever. Growing up in the quiet, working-class suburbs of Chicago, our family seemed perfectly normal from the outside. We had a modest house with a peeling front porch, a reliable station wagon in the driveway, and family road trips to the lake every summer. My parents, though definitely not wealthy, provided a stable, comfortable life for me and my little sister Chloe. I was 13 and Chloe was 9 when the foundation of our entire reality cracked and shattered. My father sat us down at the kitchen table one rainy Tuesday and announced he was leaving my mother for his 26-year-old secretary, Sarah. Within 6 short months, they were legally married and had relocated to Seattle, over 2,000 miles away from the wreckage they left behind. My mother, Clara, was utterly devastated. She had been a dedicated stay-at-home mom for her entire adult life, managing the household while my dad worked. Suddenly, she was violently thrust into a ruthless workforce with outdated clerical skills, a resume with a 15-year gap, and a mountain of unresolved emotional baggage. Despite my father offering a very generous monthly child support package, my mother flatly refused it out of pure, unadulterated pride. "We don't need a single dime of his dirty money," she would say through heavily gritted teeth whenever the topic was breached. This stubborn decision made things incredibly tight financially, but my mother was fiercely determined to prove to the world, and to my father, that she could manage perfectly fine alone. As the oldest child, I quickly learned that I had to step up and become the man of the house. By the time I was 14, I was spending my sweltering summers mowing lawns for the entire neighborhood and my freezing winters shoveling steep driveways until my hands were blistered and raw. I took over the cooking, boiling cheap pasta and making casseroles when my mom worked double shifts, and I still somehow maintained straight A's in all my advanced classes. While I willingly took on the heavy burden of adult responsibility, my mother compensated for my father's glaring absence by completely spoiling Chloe rotten. Absolutely nothing was ever denied to her. She got brand new designer clothes while I wore thrift store jeans, she got the latest expensive toys, extra portions of dessert, and vastly extended curfews. My mother's reasoning was always the exact same repetitive excuse: she's just a fragile little girl who misses her daddy. I understood my mother's underlying motivation, but the blatant double standard was suffocating. When Chloe threw massive, screaming tantrums in the grocery store over a toy, my mother coddled her and bought it. When she brought home a report card full of D's and F's, my mother immediately made excuses to the teachers. "Not everyone is academically inclined," she would say defensively, completely ignoring the fact that Chloe spent 6 hours a day scrolling on her phone instead of opening a single textbook. Meanwhile, I was rigidly expected to excel at absolutely everything without a single complaint. By the time I graduated high school as the valedictorian, I had meticulously saved enough money from my odd jobs for my first year of college, and secured a full-ride academic scholarship for the remaining 3 years. I chose a rigorous state university with a highly ranked business and finance program. To save money, I lived in a cramped, moldy, off-campus apartment with 3 loud roommates, surviving mostly on bulk rice and ramen noodles. I worked 25 hours a week at the campus library, organizing shelves until midnight, while miraculously maintaining my 3.9 gigapascals. My relentless hard work finally paid off when I graduated with highest honors and immediately landed a highly coveted spot at a top-tier financial investment firm in the city. Chloe's path, unsurprisingly, was vastly different. She barely managed to scrape by and graduate high school, then drifted aimlessly through a local community college, changing her major a staggering 5 times in 3 years from art history to psychology to communications to graphic design, and finally to general studies. Despite my mother working exhausting extra shifts at the clinic to pay for Chloe's endless education, my sister treated college like a permanently extended social event, prioritizing frat parties and weekend trips over midterms and essays. When Chloe finally managed to transfer to a standard 4-year university, I was 28 years old and rapidly establishing my lucrative career in corporate finance. I had just gotten a massive promotion and a substantial bonus. My mother called me one Sunday evening, her voice dripping with guilt-tripping sweetness, and asked if I could help just a little bit with Chloe's upcoming tuition payment. That little bit of help rapidly snowballed into me paying for absolutely everything: her full out-of-state tuition, her expensive textbooks, her luxury off-campus housing, and a massive monthly allowance for groceries and entertainment. I honestly didn't mind helping my family at first. My career was thriving, my investment portfolio was growing, and I was making exceptionally good money. But it deeply bothered me that Chloe never seemed remotely grateful, never worked a single hour at a part-time job, and never tried to ease the crushing financial burden I was carrying. She would only ever call or text me when she needed a quick cash transfer, usually prefaced with the manipulative phrase, "Mom said you wouldn't mind helping me out." Everything in my neatly compartmentalized life changed the moment I met Elena. We worked for the exact same massive financial firm, though we were in entirely different departments. We organically connected during a week-long corporate leadership retreat in Aspen. I was immediately drawn to her sharp intelligence, her witty sense of humor, and her quiet, unwavering confidence. Elena came from a very wealthy family. Her parents, Richard and Susan Vance, owned a highly successful commercial real estate development company, but she had fiercely insisted on making her own way in the world. She had worked part-time through her undergrad, earned her own competitive scholarships, and aggressively climbed the corporate ladder through sheer, undeniable determination and grit. My mother's initial reaction to Elena was lukewarm at best, and downright hostile at worst. During our very first introductory family dinner at a nice Italian restaurant, my mother spent the entire 2 hours loudly talking about Chloe's boundless creative spirit and making pointed remarks about how some special people just aren't meant for soulless, conventional corporate success. Elena was incredibly gracious and polite, but I could clearly see that the subtle, passive-aggressive digs deeply bothered her. Chloe was significantly worse, openly rolling her eyes whenever Elena spoke about her recent promotion and making snide, sarcastic comments under her breath about corporate robotic drones. Despite my family's freezing cold reception, Elena and I grew closer and our bond deepened into something unbreakable. After 2.5 years of an amazing relationship, I planned a romantic trip to the coast, got down on one knee on a secluded beach at sunset, and asked her to marry me. She joyfully accepted. I naively thought my family would be ecstatic for me, but their congratulations seemed incredibly forced and entirely hollow. My mother immediately crossed her arms and bluntly asked if Elena's rich snob parents would be fully paying for the wedding, while Chloe loudly questioned why we were rushing into a trap when we had only been together for a few years. As my beautiful relationship with Elena flourished, I finally began to see my toxic family dynamics with crystal clarity. I had foolishly enabled my mother's blatant favoritism and Chloe's staggering entitlement for over a decade. I had been the responsible adult, the permanent fixer, the endless bank account. And for the very first time in my entire life, I was firmly prioritizing my own happiness and my own future, which clearly threatened the parasitic financial system my mother and sister had grown so comfortably accustomed to. But I wasn't quite ready to confront them head on yet. Keeping the peace had always been my default survival mechanism since childhood, and I desperately hoped that once they got to know Elena better, they would naturally come around and see how amazing she was. Looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight, I should have known the wedding planning would be the ultimate breaking point. All the deep-seated resentment, bitter jealousy, and toxic dysfunction that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface for 20 years was about to explosively boil over in the most public, humiliating, and painful way imaginable. When Elena and I officially announced our engagement at a small Sunday brunch gathering at my apartment, my mother managed a tight, painfully fake smile while Chloe closely examined her manicured fingernails with sudden, intense interest. "Well, congratulations, I guess," my sister finally muttered, her flat tone suggesting she was begrudgingly acknowledging a minor, insignificant achievement rather than celebrating a massive life milestone. That freezing cold response was just the opening act of what would become 18 agonizing months of relentless wedding planning drama. Elena's parents, Richard and Susan, generously insisted on paying for the entire wedding. "Our only daughter deserves her absolute dream day," Richard said warmly over dinner one night. They were genuinely kind, grounded people who had built their massive real estate empire from scratch. Unlike the harmful stereotype of wealthy elites, they were incredibly down-to-earth, deeply generous, and extremely welcoming to me. Their incredibly generous offer should have been received with immense gratitude and relief, but my mother predictably interpreted it as a massive personal slight against her ego. I suppose nothing our humble family could ever provide would be good enough for her high standards. My mother muttered bitterly to me in the kitchen after a brief meeting with the Vances to discuss the initial venue plans. "Not all of us can afford to throw away thousands on useless extravagance." Elena had never once commented negatively on our family's modest finances or expressed anything but deep appreciation for my mother's basic hospitality. Yet, my mother persistently and maliciously painted my fiancé as an arrogant, out-of-touch snob. As the intricate planning progressed, Chloe's bitter jealousy intensified tenfold. When Elena kindly asked her to be a bridesmaid, hoping to bridge the gap between them, my sister accepted with visible, dramatic reluctance. I guess I really don't have a choice if I want to avoid a massive family drama. She sighed heavily, instantly turning a kind, inclusive gesture into a suffocating obligation. The very first major incident occurred during the crucial bridesmaid dress shopping trip. Elena had excitedly scheduled a private VIP appointment at an upscale bridal boutique downtown, carefully arranging it 2 full months in advance to perfectly accommodate everyone's busy schedules. Chloe texted me exactly 30 minutes after the appointment was supposed to start. Something came up, can't make it. Sorry, not sorry. Later that afternoon, her public Instagram story told the real, infuriating truth as Chloe posted a series of laughing photos and boomerang videos from a bottomless mimosa brunch with her sorority friends at a trendy restaurant exactly 2 blocks away from the bridal boutique. When I angrily confronted her over the phone, Chloe entirely dismissed my valid frustration. God, Liam, it's just a stupid piece of fabric. Why is everyone acting so insanely uptight about this boring wedding stuff? Elena, ever the diplomatic peacemaker, quietly rescheduled a secondary, private fitting just for Chloe, who arrived 45 minutes late, smelling like stale alcohol, and loudly complained about every single style, color, and fabric option presented to her. The venue visits quickly became another exhausting battleground. Elena and I had completely fallen in love with a breathtakingly renovated historical library overlooking the downtown riverfront. It had towering ceilings, massive arched windows, and incredible character. During our mandatory family tour, Chloe loudly pointed out every perceived flaw she could find. The cobblestone floor is totally uneven, someone is going to break their ankle. The ambient lighting is terribly harsh and makes everyone look pale. The vaulted acoustics will make the boring speeches impossible to hear. The venue coordinator, a highly professional woman with 20 years of strict industry experience, looked increasingly horrified and uncomfortable as Chloe's relentless barrage of criticisms mounted. The expensive menu tasting event should have been a highly enjoyable evening, but Chloe suddenly and miraculously developed severe, life-threatening allergies to all of Elena's favorite dishes. I literally cannot believe you'd selfishly select a menu that could send. Though these mysterious, severe food allergies had never once been mentioned in the 25 years I'd known her, the executive caterer patiently offered 3 separate custom alternatives, which Chloe rudely rejected for various ridiculous reasons, claiming the textures were weird. Even the floral arrangements became highly controversial. Elena had carefully chosen a stunning combination of classic white roses and vibrant blue hydrangeas, a simple but incredibly elegant arrangement that matched our overall theme. White flowers at a wedding? Wow, absolutely groundbreaking, Elena, Chloe commented sarcastically with a massive eye roll. And aren't blue hydrangeas supposed to be terrible luck for a marriage? In some obscure cultures, they weren't, as the master florist politely and professionally confirmed, but Chloe had already planted her toxic seed of negativity. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were purposefully planned for the exact same weekend in 2 entirely different locations. My college friends brilliantly organized a relaxed, 3-day fishing trip at a quiet lakeside cabin upstate, while Elena's close friends planned a luxurious, relaxing spa wellness weekend at a highly rated resort. Somehow, through sheer manipulation, Chloe convinced several of the more impressionable bridesmaids that a quiet spa was incredibly boring for old ladies and completely hijacked the bachelorette party, redirecting the entire itinerary to a chaotic series of loud, crowded VIP nightclubs. Elena, who is not a big drinker and deeply hates loud, crowded spaces, quietly endured a miserable, exhausting weekend that catered entirely and exclusively to Chloe's selfish preferences. Throughout this entire agonizing period, Chloe's ridiculous financial demands increased exponentially. She suddenly needed a brand new car because her perfectly fine 5-year-old Honda sedan wouldn't look good parked in the background of the wedding photos. She desperately wanted to break her lease and move into a much more expensive high-rise apartment because her current place was way too depressing and dark, and she claimed she desperately needed somewhere nice and aesthetic to prepare mentally and emotionally for the extreme stress of my wedding. Each outrageous request came heavily packaged with intense emotional manipulation from my mother. If you really cared about your only sister's mental health, Liam. Or, I guess Elena's expensive comfort matters significantly more than your own flesh and blood's basic well-being. Despite my rapidly growing, simmering frustration, I foolishly continued supporting her financially to keep the fragile peace. I stupidly paid the massive security deposit, and co-signed the ironclad lease on a luxury downtown apartment that was well beyond what a part-time barista who skipped classes could ever afford. I completely covered her exorbitant out-of-state tuition for yet another wasted semester, despite her officially being placed on academic probation for failing 3 core classes. I even foolishly helped with a $5,000 down payment on a significantly newer SUV, though thankfully not the luxury imported model she had initially demanded. Elena clearly noticed the toxic, draining pattern, but she approached the incredibly sensitive topic very gently. You know, Liam, you really don't have to automatically say yes to absolutely everything she demands, right? She said softly one night as we lay in bed. Right after I'd reluctantly approved yet another $500 Venmo request for Chloe's emergency textbooks. I really feel like she's aggressively taking advantage of your incredible generosity. She's family, I replied automatically, reciting the ingrained, robotic response I'd been heavily programmed to give since I was 13 years old. But Elena's astute observation had struck a deep, painful nerve in my soul. Was I actually helping Chloe succeed in life, or was I actively enabling destructive, entitled behaviors that would ultimately ruin her future? The rehearsal dinner should have been my massive, glaring wake-up call. We had reserved a beautiful, private dining room at a highly exclusive, upscale steakhouse with a strict start time to properly accommodate our 30-person bridal party. Chloe arrived a staggering 45 minutes late, clearly slightly intoxicated, and shockingly wearing a stunning, floor-length white silk dress that was suspiciously, undeniably bridal in its elegant style. My mother immediately leaped to make ridiculous excuses. The downtown traffic was just absolutely terrible, Liam. It wasn't. I had checked the maps. And she worked a grueling double shift at the coffee shop today. She hadn't. Her manager was a friend of mine and confirmed she had called out sick. As Elena's father, Richard, stood up and gave an incredibly heartfelt, tear-jerking toast officially welcoming me into their loving family, Chloe audibly snorted, rolled her eyes, and loudly whispered something highly inappropriate to my cousin that made them both erupt into disruptive giggles. I saw the sharp flash of deep hurt and embarrassment in Elena's beautiful eyes, and for a fleeting, angry moment, I seriously considered dragging my sister out of the restaurant and confronting her. But with the massive wedding ceremony just a few short hours away, I cowardly convinced myself to let it go. Just one more day of keeping the peace, I thought exhaustedly to myself. After the wedding is over, I will finally establish some strict, non-negotiable boundaries. I had absolutely no idea that after the wedding would arrive in such a spectacular, devastating, and deeply humiliating fashion. The morning of our highly anticipated wedding day dawned absolutely perfect, with clear, vibrant blue skies and a gentle, refreshing breeze coming off the nearby river. Elena and I had decided to stick with classic tradition and spend the entire night before apart. As I nervously adjusted my silk tie in the massive hotel suite mirror, my best man, David, snapped a quick candid photo on his phone. Looking sharp, man, he said with a massive, genuine smile. Today is the day absolutely everything changes for the better. He had no idea how terrifyingly prophetic those simple words would turn out to be. The beautiful ceremony was absolutely everything we had ever hoped and prayed for. Elena appeared at the end of the long, flower-lined aisle in a breathtaking, classic A-line lace gown that completely took my breath away and brought tears to my eyes. Her father, beaming with immense pride, kissed her cheek tenderly before placing her trembling hand securely in mine. We exchanged deeply personal, emotional vows we had spent months writing ourselves, and I noticed genuine tears of joy in the eyes of almost all our guests. Even my mother seemed momentarily moved, dabbing at her eyes with a lace tissue. Chloe, standing off to the side with the other bridesmaids, maintained a bored, completely neutral expression throughout the entire 30-minute ceremony. After the beautiful ceremony concluded, the guests happily moved to the stunning reception area for an extended cocktail hour while we took our formal portraits. Elena was absolutely radiant, laughing joyfully as the professional photographer directed us through various romantic poses. I literally cannot believe we're actually married, she whispered excitedly during a quiet, intimate moment between shots. This is without a doubt the happiest day of my entire life. The grand reception began flawlessly. The historical library building looked absolutely magical, with thousands of warm string lights draping elegantly from the massive exposed wooden beams and expensive candles flickering romantically on each perfectly set table. Our highly anticipated first dance went perfectly as we swayed smoothly to our chosen song, At Last by Etta James. The massive crowd applauded loudly as I dramatically dipped Elena at the final, soaring note, both of us laughing with pure, unadulterated joy. Dinner was promptly served, a delicious, gourmet 3-course meal that had taken us months of stressful tasting to finalize. The traditional speeches began shortly after, with David sharing hilarious, slightly embarrassing stories from our wild college days while still beautifully highlighting my better, more mature qualities. Elena's maid of honor spoke incredibly eloquently about their lifelong friendship and warmly welcomed me into their tight-knit circle. Throughout these beautiful, touching moments, I acutely noticed Chloe making highly frequent, unsteady trips to the open bar, returning each time with a significantly fuller glass of expensive champagne. When Elena's father finally stood up to give his highly anticipated keynote speech, Chloe was visibly, heavily swaying in her velvet seat. My mother, seated directly beside her, seemed completely oblivious, or perhaps deliberately, willfully ignorant of my sister's rapidly deteriorating, drunken state. Mr. Vance spoke incredibly warmly about the true value of family, the deep importance of supporting one another through life's inevitable challenges, and the beauty of true love. We absolutely couldn't be happier or more proud to officially welcome Liam into our family, he concluded powerfully, raising his crystal glass high. To Elena and Liam, may your love last a lifetime. As the 200 guests happily echoed the toast, Chloe loudly muttered something highly derogatory, loud enough for several nearby tables to clearly hear. I couldn't make out the exact words over the applause, but the deeply shocked, disgusted expressions of those sitting around her told me more than enough. My mother simply patted Chloe's arm soothingly, exactly as if she were a tired toddler having a minor, understandable tantrum, rather than a 25-year-old adult actively disrupting a formal wedding reception. The incredibly tense situation rapidly escalated to its breaking point when the DJ cheerfully announced it was finally time to cut the wedding cake. Elena and I proudly stood before the massive, three-tiered creation, a classic, elegant design with subtle emerald green and gold details that perfectly matched our carefully chosen color scheme. As I lovingly placed my hand over Elena's to make the very first ceremonial cut, Chloe suddenly and aggressively appeared right beside us out of nowhere, a full champagne flute gripped tightly in her shaking hand. Smile for the camera, you absolutely perfect couple, she slurred loudly, her voice dripping with thick, venomous sarcasm. Elena visibly tensed beside me but bravely maintained her beautiful smile as the photographer, sensing the awkwardness, continued rapidly clicking photos. Maybe you should go sit down, Chloe, I suggested very quietly, trying to keep my voice low. We can talk about whatever is bothering you later. Talk later? Chloe's voice violently rose to a piercing shout. That's your brilliant solution to absolutely everything, isn't it, Liam? Later, never right now. Never when it actually matters to me. The guests were all beginning to openly stare. The DJ, sensing the impending disaster, awkwardly lowered the ambient background music volume to a faint whisper. I placed a gentle, warning hand on Chloe's bare arm, attempting to physically guide her away from the delicate cake table. Chloe, this is absolutely not the time or the place for this. That's exactly when she violently jerked her arm away from my grasp and aggressively raised her full champagne glass high into the air. A toast to my incredibly perfect brother, she announced at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Who always does absolutely everything right. Perfect grades, perfect high-paying job, perfect little wife from a perfect, disgustingly rich family. Before I or anyone else could even physically react, she violently lunged forward and flung the entire contents of her heavy glass directly at Elena. The sticky, golden champagne splashed violently across my wife's face, ruining her perfect makeup, and completely soaked the front of her expensive, custom white lace dress, leaving her gasping loudly in pure, icy shock. In the horrifying moment of completely stunned, dead silence that instantly followed, Chloe wasn't even finished with her rampage. She aggressively turned to the beautiful wedding cake, raised her hand, and shoved her entire fist straight into the middle tier, grabbing a massive handful of frosting and cake, and violently smashing it down onto the pristine white tablecloth. This is exactly what you get for acting like you're so much better than me. She screamed hysterically, her face completely contorted with ugly, unhinged rage. Always the perfect golden son, always the highly successful one, always looking down your arrogant nose at me. The entire room froze in a state of collective, horrified shock. Then, as if the nightmare situation couldn't possibly get any worse, my mother rushed forward through the crowd. Not to physically restrain Chloe, not to profusely apologize to a sobbing Elena, but to tightly embrace my sister protectively. It's okay, sweetheart, I've got you, she cooed softly, gently stroking Chloe's hair as if my sister were the innocent victim of a brutal attack. She just needs to let her emotions out, my mother loudly explained to the crowd of 200 horrified onlookers, completely acting as if this psychotic behavior were a natural, healthy emotional release rather than an inexcusable, violent assault on my bride. Elena stood perfectly still, sticky champagne dripping slowly from her ruined hair, her absolute dream dress permanently stained. Her parents immediately rushed to her side with cloth, napkins and furious, supportive words. My new father-in-law, Richard, looked absolutely ready to physically drag Chloe out of the building by her hair, but Elena gently restrained him with a shaking hand on his suited arm. Not right now, Dad. I heard her whisper, her voice cracking. Please, let's not make a bigger scene. Let's not make it worse. David and several of my furious groomsmen quickly surrounded Chloe and my mother, diplomatically but incredibly firmly escorting them out of the main hall and into a small side room. The professional DJ, showing remarkable situational awareness and presence of mind, immediately raised the music volume to a booming level and loudly announced the opening of the main dance floor, desperately attempting to redirect the shocked guests' attention away from the disaster. Elena's frantic bridesmaids quickly surrounded her in a protective circle, helping her rush to the private bridal suite to desperately assess the severe damage to her gown. I stood completely alone by the ruined, smashed cake, my mind entirely blank with pure shock, which was rapidly being replaced by a mounting, white-hot, blinding anger. Elena's mother, Susan, firmly squeezed my arm as she hurried past me. "Go check on your wife, Liam," she said with steely resolve. "Richard and I will handle this mess." When I finally entered the bridal suite, Elena was remarkably, beautifully composed. The absolute worst of the sticky champagne had been carefully blotted from her delicate lace dress, though a massive, faint yellow stain permanently remained on the bodice. "It's okay, Liam," she said softly when she saw the absolute devastation and fury on my face. "It's really just a dress." "It is absolutely not okay," I replied, my voice tight and trembling with strictly controlled, explosive rage. "None of this is even remotely okay." Elena gently took my shaking hands in hers. "Liam, look at me. We have exactly two choices right now. We can let her toxic tantrum completely ruin our entire wedding day, or we can go back out there, hold our heads high, and show everyone in that room that our love is significantly stronger than her pathetic drama. This day is about us, Liam. It is not about Chloe." Her incredible, unwavering strength absolutely amazed me. We took a deep breath, composed ourselves, and returned to the reception hall, where the highly efficient catering staff had already completely removed the damaged cake and discreetly served the remaining, intact portions. Our amazing guests, taking clear cues from our calm composure, gradually returned to celebrating, dancing, and drinking. Chloe and my mother had apparently been completely escorted off the premises, and had left the venue entirely. As we slowly danced, mingled with our supportive friends, and desperately tried to salvage the remaining hours of our incredibly special day, Elena leaned very close to my ear over the loud music. "When we get back from our honeymoon, Liam, something major has to change," she whispered firmly. "I love you with all my heart, and I will support whatever you decide to do, but this absolute insanity cannot continue." I slowly nodded, knowing with absolute, terrifying certainty that she was entirely right. For way too long, I had cowardly enabled the deep-seated dysfunction in my family, constantly prioritizing temporary, fragile peace over necessary, healthy boundaries. As Elena and I swayed gently to another slow song, with our guests watching us with highly sympathetic, loving smiles, I made a massive, life-altering decision. The vicious cycle would permanently end right now. "I'll completely handle it," I promised my brave new wife. "Starting tonight." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow in surprise. "Tonight, Liam? We literally leave for our honeymoon flight tomorrow afternoon." "Some things absolutely cannot wait another second," I replied, my mind already rapidly, coldly calculating exactly what needed to be done. Trust me, by the time we finally returned to our luxurious hotel room late that night, completely exhausted from the insane emotional roller coaster of the day, my meticulous plan of action was fully, perfectly formed. While Elena took a long, hot shower to finally wash the sticky champagne out of her hair and prepared for bed, I sat stone-faced at the small desk in our suite, with my laptop open, making an incredibly detailed, comprehensive spreadsheet of every single financial tie that existed between myself and my sister. The wedding day disaster had been excruciatingly painful, but it had also been incredibly clarifying. And absolute clarity, I was quickly discovering, could be a highly powerful, ruthless motivator for immediate action. The digital clock on the hotel nightstand read exactly 5:30 a.m. the next morning when I woke up. I was incredibly careful not to disturb Elena as I quietly slipped out from under the heavy down comforter, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. Our long international flight to the Maldives wasn't until late that afternoon, giving me just enough precious time to flawlessly execute my master plan. I opened my laptop in the dim light of the suite and pulled up the spreadsheet I had created the night before, Chloe Financial Inventory. The massive list was significantly longer and more horrifying than even I had consciously realized. Out-of-state college tuition deposit for the upcoming fall semester, $4,500. Co-signed lease on her luxury downtown apartment, $2,800 monthly. Car insurance premiums for her new SUV, $250 monthly. Credit card entirely in my name that she was an authorized user on, averaging $3,500 monthly in ridiculous charges. Direct bank transfers for emergencies and groceries, approximately $1,500 monthly. Upgraded cell phone on my unlimited family plan, $150 monthly. Various premium streaming services on my accounts, $100 monthly. Premium health insurance supplement, $500 monthly. All told, I was blindly spending nearly $13,300 every single month fully supporting my 25-year-old sister, an adult who actively chose to work a measly 10 hours a week and consistently failed her basic college classes. The sickening realization hit me like a physical, violent blow to the stomach. This wasn't helping her succeed. This was entirely crippling her ability to function as an independent adult. My very first phone call, exactly at 8 a.m. when the university offices opened, was to the Financial Aid and Bursars Department. "I need to immediately withdraw a massive tuition deposit that was recently made." I explained incredibly calmly to the confused administrator on the phone. After rigorously verifying my identity, providing my social security number, and confirming I was indeed the sole payer on the specific account, they efficiently processed my request. The $4,500 would be fully refunded to my primary checking account within 3 to 5 business days. Next, I physically visited the local bank branch in person as soon as they unlocked their glass doors at 9 a.m. I completely froze the joint checking account I had foolishly established for her, emergencies, transferred the remaining balance to my private account, and permanently removed Chloe as an authorized user on my high-limit credit card. The senior banker, a sharp woman about my age, processed the multiple requests entirely without comment, though her knowing expression strongly suggested she'd seen this exact messy family scenario play out before. At exactly 10 a.m., I met briefly via Zoom with a corporate lawyer I had previously consulted for complex investment advice. What are my exact legal obligations and liabilities regarding the luxury apartment lease I foolishly co-signed for my sister? I asked, after briefly explaining the messy situation in broad strokes. You are fully legally liable for the entire rent amount if your sister fails to pay, he confirmed grimly, but you can proactively contact the landlord right now and explain the situation. They might allow you to pay a steep penalty fee to permanently remove your name from the lease, especially if you give them ample notice or if your sister miraculously agrees to add another qualified cosigner. I called the massive property management company next. The senior leasing manager was surprisingly understanding of the situation. Messy family situations can be incredibly complicated, she said diplomatically. We can effectively freeze the current lease agreement today and require a brand new, rigorous application with a completely different guarantor if your sister wishes to stay in the unit. Otherwise, she will be legally required to vacate the premises within 30 days. And yes, you will still be held financially responsible for any damages to the unit or unpaid rent during that brief transition period. I agreed to the terms immediately, and paid a $1,000 penalty fee on the spot to initiate the removal process. Throughout the entire busy morning, my phone buzzed absolutely constantly with a barrage of frantic text notifications from Chloe. Liam, why aren't you answering me? Mom is completely freaking out about last night. Honestly, it wasn't even that big a deal. Elena seems like she can take a harmless joke. You always massively overreact to everything. Can you transfer me $600 right now? The SUV needs new tires. I coldly ignored every single one of them, focusing entirely on my massive checklist. I swiftly canceled the automatic monthly payments for her expensive car insurance, completely removed her phone line from my unlimited family plan with a mandatory 30-day termination notice, and aggressively changed the passwords on every single streaming service account. By noon, I had effectively, ruthlessly cut off absolutely every single financial tie except the apartment lease, which would logically take a bit more time to fully, legally resolve. I finally met Elena for a quiet lunch at a beautiful, secluded restaurant near our hotel, feeling physically and mentally lighter than I had in over a decade. You look incredibly different, she observed astutely, closely studying my relaxed face over her salad. What exactly have you been doing all morning while I was packing? I explained my ruthless actions in extreme, meticulous detail. Elena listened incredibly closely without interrupting once, her beautiful expression deeply thoughtful. When I finally finished detailing the financial slaughter, she reached across the small table and squeezed my hand tightly. Are you absolutely sure about this, Liam? She asked softly. I know they're your family, and this is going to cause a massive explosion. That's exactly why I'm doing it, I replied with absolute, unwavering certainty. Real family doesn't brutally exploit each other. Real family wants each member to actually grow, mature, and thrive. What I've been doing for the past 5 years is actively enabling her crippling dependence and massive entitlement. Elena nodded slowly, her eyes shining with pride. I support you completely, Liam. But be highly prepared for the massive backlash. It is going to get significantly worse before it ever gets better. As if perfectly on cue, my cell phone violently rang. My mother's name aggressively flashed on the bright screen. After ignoring 14 previous calls, I decided it was finally time to face the music and answer. Liam, finally, my mother shrieked into the receiver. Where on earth have you been? Chloe is absolutely hysterical in her apartment. She says her platinum card was humiliatingly declined at the expensive grocery store, and the bank teller just told her you maliciously removed her from the accounts. There must be some massive computer mistake. Her voice held that deeply familiar, toxic tone of assumed authority, exactly as if I were still a disobedient 13-year-old boy who had misbehaved. I took a very deep, calming breath before responding. There is absolutely no mistake, Mom. After what horrifically happened at my wedding last night, massive changes needed to be made immediately. You cannot possibly be serious. Her shrill voice rose a full octave, hurting my ear. She made a tiny little scene. Yes, she was a bit emotional. Weddings naturally bring up highly complicated feelings for people. You cannot brutally punish your own sister financially just for having valid emotions. This is not a punishment, Mom, I explained in a freezing, calm tone. This is a natural consequence. Chloe is 25 years old, not 15. Throwing a full glass of sticky champagne directly into my wife's face and violently destroying our $2,000 wedding cake goes way beyond a tiny little scene, but honestly, even if that completely unforgivable assault hadn't happened, this financial change was massively overdue. I've been enabling her pathetic dependence for way too long. My mother's voice instantly turned to pure, unadulterated ice. So, that's it, then. Your fancy, rich new wife decides your real, flesh and blood family isn't good enough for her high standards, and you just brutally cut us off like trash. This has absolutely nothing to do with Elena, I stated with iron firmness, my anger flaring. This is entirely about establishing healthy, necessary boundaries that should have existed 10 years ago. Chloe desperately needs to learn true independence and adult responsibility. She'll have to drop out of her university. She'll be violently evicted onto the streets. Is that what you genuinely want, Liam? What I genuinely want is for my 25-year-old sister to finally grow up. She has plenty of viable options. She can finally get a full-time job like a normal adult. She can apply for standard student loans and financial aid. She can find 3 roommates for a much more affordable apartment. There are real-world consequences to her terrible actions, and it is finally time she experienced them. My mother's voice suddenly turned incredibly tearful, deploying her absolute final, most toxic manipulation tactic. You are completely destroying this family, Liam. Your father selfishly left us, and now you're cruelly abandoning us, too. The deeply unfair comparison stung me, but I held my ground firmly. I am not abandoning anyone, Mom. I am still right here, still completely willing to have a healthy emotional relationship with both of you. But the massive financial support has permanently ended. Goodbye. After I hung up the phone, Elena looked at me with deep concern. Are you okay, baby? I considered the heavy question very carefully, looking deep inside myself. Yes, I finally answered, a massive smile breaking across my face. For the very first time in an incredibly long time, I think I actually am. We finished our lunch, returned to the hotel, and grabbed our bags to head to the airport for our honeymoon flight. As we headed through security, I completely powered off my phone, fully knowing the insane barrage of frantic calls and hateful messages would continue. For the next 2 glorious weeks, the secluded beaches of the Maldives would be our impenetrable sanctuary. But my mind was already meticulously planning exactly what would happen when we finally returned, because aggressively cutting off the financial support was only the very first step. The real, grueling challenge would be attempting to rebuild my shattered family relationships on entirely new, healthier terms if that was even remotely possible. Our luxurious honeymoon in the Maldives was exactly what our battered souls desperately needed. 2 full weeks of pristine white beaches, crystal clear water, romantic dinners, and complete, blissful disconnection from the toxic drama waiting at home. The remote island resort had incredibly spotty cell service, which gave me the absolute perfect, plausible excuse to keep my phone completely powered off for the vast majority of the trip. When our long flight finally landed back in Seattle and the wheels touched the tarmac, reality crashed back into my life instantly. The moment I powered my phone on, it buzzed continuously for nearly 5 straight minutes with a massive avalanche of accumulated notifications, 64 missed calls, 142 unread text messages, 38 frantic voicemails, and dozens of angry social media tags. The missed calls were primarily from my furious mother and a panicking Chloe, with a few highly concerning ones from extended family members who had apparently been heavily recruited to their toxic cause. The long string of text messages painted a vivid, pathetic picture of Chloe's rapidly escalating panic, deep confusion, and explosive anger as she slowly discovered each and every financial change I had made. Liam, my platinum card was humiliatingly declined at the mall. Call me ASAP. The apartment leasing office just emailed me and says you froze the lease. What the actual hell are you doing? The university bursar says my massive tuition deposit was completely withdrawn. Is this some kind of sick, twisted joke? I literally cannot believe you are doing this to your own flesh and blood over a stupid, harmless wedding prank. Mom is absolutely devastated. I hope you're happy with yourself. Your rich snob wife totally put you up to this, didn't she? She never liked me from day one. Call me back right now, you pathetic coward. The 38 voicemails followed a very similar, predictable pattern, starting with mild confusion, rapidly escalating to screaming anger, then pathetic attempts at emotional guilt tripping, and finally, desperate, sobbing bargaining. My mother's voicemails were particularly toxic and highly manipulative, ranging from, I clearly raised you to be a much better man than this monster, to, I've been having severe chest pains and heart palpitations from the immense stress you're causing me. If I die, it's on your hands. Elena quietly scrolled through some of the insane messages on the taxi ride back to our house, her beautiful expression a complex mixture of utter disbelief and profound vindication. Wow. She murmured softly after listening to a particularly vitriolic, screaming voicemail from Chloe where she called me every curse word in the book. And they honestly wonder why you desperately needed to set strict boundaries. We had barely unpacked our suitcases and settled into our house when the front doorbell violently rang. Peering through the small peephole, I saw my mother standing rigidly in the hallway, her arms tightly crossed, her expression grim and furious. I took a deep breath, braced myself for impact, and slowly opened the heavy door. "So, you finally decided to come out of hiding," she hissed by way of greeting, her eyes narrowing. "While you were off selfishly enjoying your luxury tropical vacation, your poor sister has been absolutely suffering." I stepped back, allowing her to enter the foyer, but entirely refusing to take the aggressive bait. "Would you like a glass of water or some coffee, Mom?" She completely ignored the polite offer, pacing our living room like an aggressive prosecutor preparing to deliver a damning opening statement. Chloe had to actually borrow money from her broke friends just to buy basic groceries. The luxury apartment complex gave her a strict 30-day warning about eviction. Her premium phone service was completely cut off. "And you honestly think this cruel behavior is remotely appropriate?" "I think it's the completely natural consequence of her terrible behavior," I replied calmly, leaning against the wall. "She is a 25-year-old adult who made terrible choices. Adults face real consequences for their choices. This is entirely Elena's toxic influence," my mother aggressively accused, glaring violently at my wife, who had quietly entered the room and was standing supportively by my side. "You were never this incredibly cruel and heartless before you met her." "That is absolutely enough," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous firm register. "Elena has absolutely nothing to do with this financial decision. In fact, she has shown significantly more grace and understanding toward Chloe than most normal people ever would after having their incredibly expensive wedding deliberately, maliciously ruined." My mother's face flushed bright red with anger. "It was absolutely not deliberate. She was highly emotional. Mom," she violently threw a full glass of sticky champagne directly at my bride's face, physically destroyed our $2,000 wedding cake with her bare hands, and screamed horrific insults in front of 200 of our closest friends and colleagues. Then, instead of offering a single shred of an apology, she arrogantly asked me for $600 for new tires the very next morning. This isn't just about one isolated incident. It's about a massive, toxic pattern of abuse and entitlement that has gone on for over a decade. The screaming argument continued for nearly a full hour, covering highly familiar, exhausting ground. My mother desperately cycled through her usual arsenal of toxic tactics, heavily minimizing Chloe's violent behavior, maximizing my supposed ultimate betrayal, deeply invoking blind family loyalty, aggressively questioning Elena's moral character, and finally, playing her absolute trump card. "Your father would be so incredibly ashamed of the man you've become." That low blow nearly broke my steely resolve, not because it was actually true, but because it vividly revealed exactly how little my own mother understood me. My father, the man who had cowardly abandoned his entire family for a much younger woman, had absolutely no moral standing to judge anyone's family loyalty. After my mother finally left, violently slamming the heavy front door behind her so hard the framed pictures rattled, Elena simply held me in complete silence for a long, comforting moment. "You did incredibly well, Liam," she whispered into my chest. "Stay strong. The storm isn't over." The very next morning, I shockingly discovered that Chloe had taken her pathetic battle completely public. She had posted a massive, highly exaggerated, carefully edited account of the entire situation on her public social media pages. My millionaire brother just completely cut me off financially without a single warning just because I accidentally spilled a little drink at his fancy wedding. Now, I might be totally homeless by next week and have to drop out of my senior year of college. Blood isn't always thicker than water, I guess. Please send positive vibes. Venmo link in bio if anyone wants to help me survive. The highly manipulative post had dozens of sympathetic comments and angry shares. Several mutual friends frantically texted me asking what the hell was going on, asking if there was more to the crazy story. Some foolishly took sides immediately, either aggressively condemning my supposed cruelty or bravely defending my absolute right to establish boundaries. Distant family members I rarely even spoke with suddenly had incredibly strong, vocal opinions about my highly personal financial decisions. I consciously chose not to engage publicly whatsoever. Social media is absolutely not the place to resolve deep family trauma, I told Elena as she read me the latest ridiculous comments. Responding will only feed the toxic drama she desperately craves. While Elena and I slowly settled back into our demanding corporate work routines, Chloe aggressively escalated her frantic campaign to restore her massive financial support. Her desperate tactics ranged from highly transparent to downright concerning. First came the incredibly fake apology text message. "Liam, I've been really thinking about what happened and I'm super sorry. I was just really emotional and had way too much to drink. Can we please meet and talk?" When I cautiously agreed to meet for a quick coffee the following weekend, she instantly seemed to take this as a solid sign that the money pipeline would immediately resume flowing, and she completely canceled on me an hour before with a flimsy, pathetic excuse about having a headache. Next, she heavily enlisted our Aunt Brenda, my mother's highly vocal sister, to call me and aggressively remind me of my deep family obligations, and how much your poor mother sacrificed absolutely everything for you kids after your deadbeat father left. When this guilt trip approach completely failed, my older cousin Mark tried the relatable man-to-man angle. Dude, come on, she's your little sister. You can't just cut her off cold turkey like a drug addict. Give her some cash to tide her over. When the intense family pressure campaign completely failed to break me, Chloe moved directly to aggressive threats. If you don't immediately reinstate my tuition payment, I'll have to permanently drop out of college. Is that what you genuinely want on your conscience forever? Your only sister being a total college dropout because of your petty, vindictive revenge? I held incredibly firm through every single desperate attempt, strictly maintaining the exact same unwavering message. I'm more than happy to have a healthy relationship with you, Chloe, but the financial support has permanently ended. The toxic situation finally reached an absolute new low when Chloe physically showed up at my high-security corporate office building during the busy lunch hour. I was casually returning from a nearby sandwich shop with a few colleagues when I spotted her frantically pacing near the massive glass entrance, looking incredibly agitated and unkempt. Before I could even decide whether to cautiously approach her or avoid her entirely, she locked eyes with me. Finally, she screamed at the top of her lungs, instantly drawing the shocked attention of dozens of suited colleagues entering the busy building. Your own sister has to physically track you down at your fancy workplace because you won't answer her damn calls. I quickly and gently guided her away from the main entrance doors, acutely aware of the highly curious, whispered glances from my coworkers. Chloe, this is absolutely not appropriate. I am at my place of work. Nothing else was getting your attention, she snapped viciously. I desperately need $2,800 for my rent right now. They're going to legally evict me on Friday. We can discuss this later tonight, not here on the street, I insisted firmly, trying to keep my voice low. So, you'll finally help me? Her desperate expression brightened immediately with false hope. No, I will talk to you, but the financial support is still completely over. Her face instantly contorted with pure, unhinged rage. You selfish, arrogant bastard. You have plenty of money. You just spent thousands of dollars on a fancy, luxury tropical honeymoon while I'm literally eating cheap ramen noodles and might lose my entire apartment. As her screaming voice rose higher, significantly more heads turned our way. Deeply mortified, I desperately tried to defuse the escalating situation, but Chloe was entirely beyond reason. She continued her massive, screaming tirade until building security finally approached us, placing a hand on their radios and asking if everything was all right. No, everything is absolutely not all right. Chloe spat venomously at the security guard. My evil brother is actively trying to ruin my entire life. Eventually, I had to simply turn my back and return to work, leaving Chloe still screaming and fuming on the busy sidewalk as security watched her closely. My boss, a stern man named Greg, quietly called me into his corner office that afternoon. I heavily braced myself for a severe reprimand about the highly public, embarrassing scene, but his approach completely surprised me. Family troubles, Liam? He asked gently, pouring 2 cups of coffee. I nodded, deeply embarrassed. I'm incredibly sorry about the disruption downstairs earlier, Greg. It won't happen again. He completely waved away my apology with his hand. Don't sweat it. Someone actually sent us a viral cell phone video of your wedding reception last week. It made the quiet rounds in the office. That was quite an insane situation you handled with extreme grace. He leaned forward over his mahogany desk. Setting strict boundaries isn't easy, especially with toxic family members. Take it from someone who learned that incredibly painful lesson way too late in life. Stand your ground, son. His deep understanding was highly unexpected and incredibly appreciated. Meanwhile, my mother had dramatically begun complaining of various severe health issues to anyone who would listen. Blinding migraines, high blood pressure spikes, chronic insomnia, all allegedly directly caused by her extreme worry over Chloe's impending homelessness and her deep distress at my cruel abandonment. These highly exaggerated reports came entirely through flying monkeys' distant family members who would casually text me. Your poor mother was in such agonizing pain yesterday, she could barely get out of bed to eat. Despite the relentless, heavy guilt trips, I maintained my strict position. Elena and I enjoyed a brief, quiet weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains, a much-needed respite from the ongoing, exhausting drama. During a peaceful, snowy walk through the pines, I found myself deeply reflecting on the long-term implications of my massive decision. What if they absolutely never come around, Elle? I asked her quietly, watching our breath mist in the cold air. What if this permanently, irreparably damages my relationship with my mother and sister forever? Elena considered the heavy question seriously. That's entirely possible, Liam. She acknowledged softly. But ask yourself honestly, was the relationship you previously had actually healthy? Was it ever truly reciprocal, or was it entirely based on massive financial dependence and relentless emotional manipulation? Her highly perceptive questions were incredibly uncomfortable but entirely accurate. I guess I've just been buying their fake affection for years, I admitted sadly. And it wasn't even working. When we returned from our mountain weekend away, I had a highly surprising, unexpected voicemail waiting for me from my father. We spoke very occasionally, usually brief, awkward birthday or holiday calls, but we hadn't had a truly substantive, deep conversation in over 10 years. Liam, it's Dad. Your Aunt Brenda briefly mentioned what's been happening with Chloe and your wedding. I know we don't talk much at all, but I'd really like to discuss this if you're willing. Call me when you have a minute. I cautiously returned his call that evening, entirely unsure of what to expect. After a few minutes of awkward pleasantries, he finally got straight to the point. Your mother furiously called Sarah in tears yesterday, loudly screaming that you've completely abandoned the family. Knowing your mother's flair for the dramatic, I figured there was a completely different side to the story. I gave him the entire, unvarnished truth about Chloe's violent, drunken behavior at the wedding and the grueling years of massive financial dependence leading up to it. He sighed incredibly heavily into the phone. I owe you a massive, overdue apology, Liam. When I selfishly left, I put you in an absolutely impossible, unfair position. You became the man of the house way too young, and your mother clearly transferred all of her massive, unrealistic expectations onto your shoulders. The deep acknowledgement, 20 years overdue, hit me incredibly hard. Why are you finally telling me this now, Dad? Because I clearly see you repeating a massive mistake I made, he replied sadly. I foolishly enabled your mother's wild spending for years just to avoid intense conflict. By the time I finally tried to set a firm boundary, the relationship was entirely too damaged to ever save. You are doing the absolute right thing with Chloe. But do it for the right reasons because it will ultimately help her grow into an adult, not just because you're deeply angry about the wedding cake. His unexpected insight was surprisingly valuable. So, you honestly think I should stay firm? Absolutely, he said firmly. But keep the door slightly open for a real relationship if that's what you truly want. Just make it incredibly clear that your wallet is no longer part of the equation. After we hung up, I felt a strange, profound sense of utter clarity. The wedding disaster, as deeply painful as it was, had violently forced massive, necessary changes that had been quietly brewing for years. Now I needed to actively decide exactly what kind of relationship I wanted with my family moving forward, if any at all. Exactly 1 week after returning from our honeymoon, I formally scheduled a massive, final meeting with my mother and Chloe. Grand Brew Coffee Shop, downtown. 8:40 a.m. sharp, my brief text specified. I have something incredibly important to discuss regarding the future. I chose the extremely early time deliberately, fully knowing Chloe rarely woke up before 11 a.m. Her attendance would require actual, physical effort, a small, necessary test of her seriousness. I arrived 20 minutes early with a thick manila folder of legal documents and secured a quiet corner table far away from other customers. The busy coffee shop was filled with morning commuters grabbing their daily caffeine fix, the loud bustle providing a perfect buffer of white noise for what would likely be an incredibly emotional, screaming conversation. At exactly 8:39 a.m., my mother walked in, her expression a careful, rigid neutral. She had clearly made a massive effort with her appearance. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup was flawless. I instantly recognized the manipulative tactic, an attempt to physically convey that she was the highly composed, perfectly reasonable party in this intense conflict. A minute later, Chloe slouched heavily through the glass door, looking deliberately, pathetically disheveled in sharp contrast. She had massive dark circles under her bloodshot eyes, her messy hair was pulled back in a greasy bun, and she was wearing a stained, oversized university sweatshirt. Her visual statement was equally clear. Look at how much I'm physically suffering because of your immense cruelty. Thank you both for coming, I said calmly as they sat down. I had already purchased their preferred expensive drinks, a large vanilla latte for my mother and an iced mocha with extra whip for Chloe. This small, olive branch gesture of consideration seemed to momentarily disarm their aggressive defenses. What exactly is this about, Liam? My mother asked, her tone heavily suggesting this meeting was a massive inconvenience rather than her only hope of reconciliation. Are you finally ready to discuss reinstating Chloe's financial support? I want to deeply discuss the future, I replied calmly, folding my hands. Our future as a healthy family. Chloe rolled her eyes massively. Save the boring corporate lecture, Liam. Either you're helping me financially pay my rent, or you're not. The apartment manager is officially threatening legal eviction on Friday, and registration for next semester closes in exactly 2 weeks. I nodded slowly, acknowledging her frantic concerns without reacting to her toxic tone. I fully understand your financial situation is incredibly precarious right now. That's exactly why I wanted to meet today. I slowly opened the thick manila folder and deliberately removed 5 separate, highly detailed legal documents, placing them neatly face down on the wooden table. My mother and sister exchanged highly confused, suspicious glances. "What on earth is all this paperwork?" my mother asked suspiciously, leaning away. "The absolute real news," I replied smoothly. My final response to absolutely everything that's happened. I slowly slid the very first document toward them. This is the official deed to a small, modest condo in the suburbs. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. Nothing fancy, no luxury amenities, but it's in a highly safe neighborhood with excellent public transportation access. I purchased it in cash last week as a private investment property. Their defensive expressions rapidly shifted from deep confusion to incredibly cautious, greedy interest. Chloe eagerly reached for the deed, examining the address closely. "What exactly does this have to do with me?" "I am offering it as a basic residence for you, Chloe. The monthly costs would be significantly lower than your current luxury high-rise, and the location is actually 2 miles closer to your campus." Before the greedy hope could fully bloom in her eyes, I held up my hand and continued. "But there are massive, non-negotiable conditions." I slid the exact second document forward. "This is a standard, legally binding rental agreement. You would be a strict tenant, not an owner, with highly specific responsibilities and legal expectations. You will pay rent." Chloe's face instantly darkened with anger. "So, you're my literal landlord now? That's your brilliant solution to my homelessness?" "Please let me finish," I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. "The condo is just one small part of what I'm proposing today." I presented the third thick document. "This is extensive paperwork for a strict educational trust fund I've established. It will fully cover your basic tuition and required educational expenses, but with ironclad stipulations. You must maintain at least a strict 3 gigapascals, you must physically attend all your classes, and you must meet bi-weekly with an academic advisor who reports directly to the trust manager." My mother, who had been uncharacteristically, terrifyingly quiet, finally spoke up. "You are treating your adult sister like a misbehaving child with all these ridiculous rules and strict conditions, Liam." "No, Mom," I corrected her gently but firmly. "I am treating her exactly like an adult who desperately needs structure and accountability. There's a massive difference." I continued with the fourth document. "This legally outlines a strict monthly allowance that will be automatically deposited into a brand new, monitored account. It is exactly 1/3 of what I was previously providing you. It is an amount that covers basic, cheap groceries and necessities, but it absolutely requires massive supplementation through part-time employment." Chloe's expression violently wavered between deep resentment and frantic calculation as she mentally assessed whether this highly restrictive new arrangement would actually be worth accepting to avoid the streets. "The fifth item isn't a legal document, but an incredible opportunity," I explained smoothly. "My close colleague James runs a massive marketing department that desperately needs a part-time administrative assistant. The hours are highly flexible around your class schedule. The pay is competitive, and there is massive potential for corporate growth if you actually show initiative. He is willing to formally interview you next Tuesday." "So, I have to actually work a real job now?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with pure disgust, exactly as if the basic concept of labor were entirely foreign to her. "Most functioning adults do," I replied without a trace of sarcasm. "It's actually quite incredibly fulfilling, to earn your own money, and pay your own bills." My mother, clearly rapidly processing this highly unexpected, structured approach, leaned heavily forward. "What is the massive catch, Liam? Why are you doing all this expensive legal work after screaming that you were cutting her off completely?" I met her gaze directly, unflinchingly. "Because aggressively cutting someone off completely isn't the absolute only alternative to blindly enabling them. I genuinely want to help Chloe become an independent, highly successful adult, not a dependent, deeply resentful parasite. But there are massive behavioral conditions beyond what I've already mentioned." I carefully placed the final, most important document on the table. "This is a strict behavioral contract. It includes several absolutely non-negotiable terms." I turned my intense gaze to Chloe. "First, you will personally, verbally apologize to Elena and her entire family for what you did at the wedding. A highly genuine, deeply specific apology. Not a generic, sorry if anyone was offended non-apology." Chloe visibly stiffened, her jaw clenching, but she surprisingly didn't object. "Second, you will attend mandatory weekly therapy sessions. I've already thoroughly researched several highly qualified therapists who specifically specialize in toxic family dynamics and personal growth. You can choose which one you prefer, but attendance is strictly mandatory for the continued financial support." My mother loudly interjected, "Therapy? There is absolutely nothing fundamentally wrong with Chloe that requires a shrink." "Mom," I said gently, leaning forward, "what happened at my wedding was absolutely not normal, healthy behavior. Neither is the toxic, parasitic dynamic we've developed as a family over the last decade. We could all massively benefit from some professional perspective." Before she could aggressively argue further, I continued, Third, this entire arrangement is strictly probationary for exactly 6 months. If any of the terms are violated, particularly regarding basic respect for Elena or your academic performance, every single cent of support ends immediately. No warnings, no second chances. If things go well, we can discuss minor adjustments that grant you more financial independence as it's fully earned. And fourth, there will be a strict, mandatory cooling off period. Absolutely no contact between us for exactly 30 days, while you deeply consider this offer, move into the condo, and begin your therapy if you choose to accept. We all desperately need space to completely reset our dynamics. The heavy silence that followed was incredibly thick with tension. Chloe stared blankly at the massive pile of documents, deep internal conflict highly evident in her expression. My mother looked entirely torn between massive outrage at the strict conditions and profound relief that I wasn't completely, permanently abandoning her golden child to the streets. This really feels like a punishment, Chloe finally whispered, her voice smaller and more vulnerable than I'd heard it in over 10 years. It's absolutely not a punishment, I replied softly. It is a clear pathway to a much healthier relationship for all of us. A relationship where you clearly hold absolutely all the power, she countered bitterly. I've always held the financial power, Chloe. The massive difference is that I'm now actively using it to encourage your growth rather than fund your dependence. Eventually, the ultimate goal is for you to not need a single dime of my support at all. My mother, who had been aggressively flipping through the thick legal documents with increasing, frantic agitation, suddenly slammed her hand down hard on the wooden table. This is absolutely ridiculous, Liam. You're acting like some kind of benevolent, arrogant dictator. We are your flesh and blood family, not pathetic charity cases to be heavily managed by your lawyers. That is exactly the massive problem, Mom, I said, maintaining my icy calm. You've actively treated me like a limitless ATM machine for over 10 years, not a human son or a brother with actual feelings and boundaries. When Elena was publicly humiliated and assaulted on what should have been the happiest day of our lives, your very first instinct was to coddle the person who caused the immense pain, not the actual victims of it. Something deep in my raw words seemed to finally penetrate her thick defenses. She sat back in her chair, momentarily entirely speechless. I was only 13 years old when Dad selfishly left. I continued, my voice finally softening with raw emotion. I grew up incredibly fast because I absolutely had to. I took on massive adult responsibilities, worked grueling manual labor jobs, and helped around the house, all while maintaining perfect grades because I knew a college scholarship was my absolute only path to financial security. I didn't resent it back then because I loved you both deeply and desperately wanted to help our family survive. Chloe was looking down at her lap, aggressively refusing to meet my eyes. But somewhere along the way, my desperate helping turned into toxic enabling. My massive financial support became expected, then aggressively demanded. My corporate success became something Chloe bitterly resented rather than aspired to. And you, Mom, actively encouraged that deep resentment because it was significantly easier than actually holding her accountable for her own life. My mother's eyes rapidly filled with tears, but for once in my life, they actually seemed highly genuine rather than a tactical manipulation. I just desperately wanted to protect her. She whispered brokenly. After your father left us, I couldn't bear to see either of you hurt again. But you did deeply hurt us. I replied gently. By treating us so vastly differently, you taught Chloe that massive tantrums get financially rewarded and immense responsibility gets taken completely for granted. You set her up for massive failure when the real world doesn't work that way. Chloe, who had been uncharacteristically, totally quiet, finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Is that really how you view me? As some pathetic, spoiled brat who can't function in the real world? I considered my honest answer very carefully. I see you as someone with massive, untapped potential who's never been truly challenged to fulfill it. I see my brilliant little sister who used to draw amazing pictures and write incredible stories before she decided that academic effort wasn't cool. I see someone who's been constantly told her emotions justify absolutely any behavior, no matter who deeply gets hurt. Tears spilled rapidly down her cheeks, and for the very first time in years, they didn't seem remotely manipulative. I was so incredibly jealous of you, she admitted in a choked, sobbing voice. Absolutely everything always seemed to come so easily to you. The perfect grades, the high-paying job, the beautiful relationship. I felt like I could absolutely never measure up to you. Nothing came easily, I corrected her softly. I worked incredibly, excruciatingly hard while you were sleeping in until noon or partying at clubs. I made massive personal sacrifices while you were spending my hard-earned money on designer clothes. The massive difference wasn't natural ability, Chloe, it was extreme effort and personal accountability. My mother reached across the table for Chloe's shaking hand, but instead of her usual, toxic enabling comfort, she said something highly surprising. He's completely right, sweetheart. I didn't do you any actual favors by constantly shielding you from the real consequences of your actions. The intense, sobbing conversation that followed was easily the most brutally honest exchange our fractured family had experienced in over 2 decades. There were massive tears, deep recriminations, and highly painful acknowledgments on all sides. I openly admitted my own massive role in enabling the unhealthy dynamic by constantly taking the cowardly path of least resistance. My mother tearfully acknowledged her blatant favoritism and the immense psychological damage it had caused both of us. And Chloe, most surprisingly of all, openly admitted that her violent behavior at the wedding had been absolutely inexcusable, entirely driven by years of deep insecurity, jealousy, and massive entitlement. I was absolutely awful to Elena from day one, she confessed, wiping her eyes with a napkin. She never did a single thing to deserve my hate. I just deeply hated that she seemed so incredibly perfect, so totally put together. Next to her, I felt like a massive, pathetic mess. By the time our expensive coffee cups were entirely empty, the morning crowd had completely thinned out. We had talked for nearly 3 intense hours, covering massive ground that had been violently avoided for decades. Nothing was fully, magically resolved, but the crucial seeds of true understanding had finally been planted. I need some time to deeply think about all this, Chloe said quietly, carefully gathering the massive stack of legal documents I had brought. Take exactly the time you need, I replied calmly. The generous offer stands. But remember, the old financial arrangement is permanently over, regardless of what you decide. As we prepared to leave the shop, my mother hesitated, then hugged me incredibly awkwardly. I am so sorry, Liam, she whispered into my shoulder, for absolutely everything. It wasn't a complete, perfect resolution, but it was a massive beginning. As I watched them slowly walk out of the coffee shop together, I felt cautiously, deeply optimistic for the very first time since the wedding disaster. Real, lasting change would take immense time, highly consistent boundaries, and probably dozens more difficult, painful conversations. But the massive, impenetrable wall of denial had finally cracked wide open, and that was a highly necessary first step toward true healing. Update. 6 months after our intense coffee shop meeting, I sat comfortably in my living room watching a football game with David while Elena prepared a beautiful dinner in the kitchen. The front doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Chloe standing there with a small, wrapped gift bag. Right on time, I noted with genuine approval. Punctuality had always been a massive struggle for her, but she was making incredible progress. Therapy has me setting 3 separate alarms now, she replied with a highly self-deprecating, genuine smile. She handed me the gift bag. Happy 6-month anniversary of the new arrangement. I thought it deserved a small acknowledgement. Inside the bag was a beautifully framed, high-quality photo of Elena and me dancing happily at our wedding, the exact, perfect moment just before the absolute chaos erupted. The original photographer's digital file had been meticulously, professionally restored to remove any background evidence of the massive cake disaster that followed. It was incredibly thoughtful and deeply symbolic. This is really beautiful. Chloe, thank you so much. The past 6 months had brought truly remarkable, staggering changes. After initially intensely resisting, Chloe had fully, completely embraced the strict conditions of our new arrangement. The mandatory weekly therapy sessions, initially attended highly grudgingly, had quickly become a massive cornerstone of her personal growth. Academically, Chloe had absolutely thrived with the clear expectations and strict consequences. Her GPA had skyrocketed to a solid 3.5, and she had finally, permanently settled on a major in communications with a minor in graphic design, fields that actually perfectly suited her natural, creative talents. The part-time job with my colleague James had rapidly evolved into a position she genuinely loved. Her natural creativity and highly social skills, previously entirely channeled into toxic drama and manipulation, were now massive assets in a professional marketing environment. James had even recently mentioned the highly likely possibility of fully sponsoring her for a paid corporate internship program after her graduation. Most significantly, her relationship with Elena had completely transformed. The strictly required formal apology, delivered at a highly tense dinner 3 weeks after our coffee shop meeting, had been awkward but incredibly sincere. Elena, ever deeply gracious, had accepted it without a single reservation. Since then, they had slowly developed a highly cautious, genuine friendship, occasionally meeting for lunch or shopping without my presence required as a buffer. My mother had also undergone her own massive journey of deep self-reflection. After initially bitterly blaming me for forcing therapy on Chloe, she had eventually sought professional counseling herself. We were slowly rebuilding our fractured relationship with significantly more honest, open communication than we'd ever had before in our lives. Thanksgiving dinner, hosted at Elena's parents' massive home, had been the true, ultimate test of our progress. Richard and Susan Vance had been understandably highly apprehensive about including Chloe, but Elena had gently convinced them to give her one final chance. The evening had proceeded absolutely without a single incident, even including moments of genuine warmth and loud laughter. When Chloe publicly presented Elena's mother with a beautiful, handmade thank you card, There wasn't a single dry eye at the massive table. "Dinner's ready," Elena called happily from the kitchen, interrupting my reflections. As we gathered around the table, I quietly observed the easy, flowing conversation between Elena and Chloe about an art exhibit they had recently attended. My sister was highly engaged, articulate, and noticeably significantly more confident than she had been 6 months ago. The aggressive defensiveness that had characterized her interactions for years had diminished entirely. Later, after David and Chloe had left for the night, Elena and I settled comfortably on the couch with glasses of red wine. "She's literally like a completely different person," Elena observed softly. "I honestly never thought we'd get here." "The strict boundaries definitely helped," I acknowledged. "But the real, lasting change entirely came from her. She had to actually want it." The entire grueling experience had taught me profound, massive lessons about toxic family dynamics and personal growth. First, true love absolutely does not mean endless, blind enabling. True love, sometimes aggressively, requires highly difficult boundaries that allow people to experience natural consequences. By financially supporting Chloe unconditionally, I had actually severely impeded her growth. Second, healthy relationships absolutely require mutual respect and strict accountability. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elena said, noticing my highly contemplative mood. "Just reflecting on how incredibly far we've come," I replied, pulling her close. The wedding day disaster might have honestly been the absolute best thing that could have ever happened to my family, as terrible as it was in the exact moment. She leaned comfortably against me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Sometimes the things that seem incredibly catastrophic in the moment turn out to be massive turning points. Your sister smashing our wedding cake might have literally saved your entire relationship with her in the long run." I nodded slowly, deeply appreciating her incredible perspective and massive forgiveness. "I never in a million years thought I'd say this, but I'm actually highly looking forward to the holidays with my family this year." The wedding day disaster that had seemed so catastrophic had ultimately been the absolute breaking point my toxic family desperately needed to rebuild on much healthier terms. By standing incredibly firm when it would have been significantly easier to give in, I had helped create the perfect conditions for genuine lasting change. Sometimes the absolute hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful growth. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.